everyone. As I mentioned, we're going to be working on the same essential question because we're honing in on how to think like a geographer. So let's keep the same essential question, but it's very important at this point that you're labeling these notes appropriately. So we've got flipped video 1.5. What does it mean to think like a geographer? And now we're going to be looking at movement. Last time we talked about how geographers describe specific places on maps. Now we're going to look at how geographers study the movement of people, goods, and ideas over space. So, starting us off right from the get-go, let's put movement on the left-hand side. As I just said, geographers study the mobility, meaning the movement of people, repetitious there, people, goods, and ideas over Earth's surface. So we look at where things began, where they spread to, how fast they spread, how slow they spread, if they did not spread. All kinds of ideas here because this helps us understand how a place becomes a given place. A term that we're going to be using very, very, very frequently is diffusion. And diffusion, just like the same type of diffusion that you would discuss in a science course, diffusion is the movement or spread of a characteristic over space. So to diffuse an idea is to spread an idea. So just to get you thinking of what I'm talking about, a common place to start, one you probably already engaged in your social studies or history courses, is studying the spread of religions. And here we see the spread of Buddhism, which we'll study in detail in the winter. But you can see the geographers are concerned with where this idea started, how it spread, and why it spread. So now we're coming back to that idea of what is where, why there, and why care. There are two different types of diffusion, two major categories of diffusion. In other words, two different ways to describe how ideas, people, goods spread over space. The first category is called relocation diffusion. And relocation diffusion is the physical movement of ideas, when ideas physically go from one place to another. And that, of course, entails that someone has brought those ideas. So really what we're referring to is when ideas and goods and things move because of migration. So when a person physically moves, they diffuse their idea with them. Now the second one is a little bit more complicated. The second category is called expansion diffusion. So this is when one idea comes from a node. If you don't know what the word node is, please throw that on the left-hand side. A node would be the point of origin, the beginnings of something. So relocation diffusion involves, like, let's say, for example, when a migrant, let's go back to that map for a second. If a migrant's coming out of let's say northern China, as we see there, and they physically move, let's say that person, this is of course in AD 600, so this is going to be 1400 years ago, but let's just take ourselves back in time for a minute. Let's say that person then takes off down for Indonesia. If they continue to practice their faith, their Buddhist faith, then let's say this is that person, they are physically taking that idea with them, and they're going to continue to practice their Buddhist faith. That's relocation diffusion. In contrast, let's take the same thing. Here we have an idea, a thing. Let's say if that idea spreads from a node, it skips over some places and goes to others, then we have the idea of expansion diffusion, specifically in that instance, hierarchical diffusion. So let's break each one of these down. I already mentioned this already, that relocation diffusion is an excellent way to consider, or an excellent way to study the diffusion of faiths, because people may change their hairstyle, they may change their clothes, they may change their language, but very rarely do people, not very rarely, but more rarely do people change their religious faith. So you can often trace migration patterns through relocation diffusion of faith. You can see here actually a great example of that. And this map is not the best. I tried to find a better map for this, but Hindu faith is primarily practiced, or at least for historically has been the case in India, where on the order of 95% of the population is Hindu. There's actually, if this map was a more higher quality map, you'd see that in northern South America, there's actually a thriving Hindu community. And that's an excellent example just of relocation diffusion, people physically moving and bringing that faith with them. Similarly, the spread of the Islamic traders all across the Trans-Sahara trade and through the maritime trade began to create what we now know as the Islamic world, or what was known then as the Islamic world, but still to this day is a large concentration of Muslim faith. The British Empire, the British colonized, we'll talk about this in detail, but the British colonized, meaning they essentially conquered many, many areas of the world, and bringing with them their language, hence why we speak English here in the North American continent, or North American region, of course not in Mexico, or any of the Central American countries, but English diffused here across the world because of the British colonization. Now, relocation diffusion, I'm going to introduce a term to you that we will not study in detail for a couple months, but relocation diffusion can cause what it's called acculturation. Just throw that on the left-hand side. And acculturation is when a culture is substantially changed through the interactions with another culture. And this graphic is a pretty easy way to understand it, that we've got migrants coming in who have contact with the native people or the people who are from that place, not necessarily indigenous peoples, but just we got migrants coming in and natives who are in contact with one another. That contact leads to changes, and there's mutual adaptations often where the migrants affect the practices of the people who are from the country and vice versa. So I just wanted to introduce that term now because it's one that we'll re-loop on when we get to our culture unit. Okay, switching gears to expansion diffusion. So when an idea is really spreading and is expanding, it's no longer just one person taking their faith to a new place. When the idea is actually gaining traction and gaining, let's say, followers, then we have what's called hierarchical diffusion. Or we have, what's called expansion diffusion. And one of those types is hierarchical diffusion. So hierarchical diffusion is the spread of an idea as a result of one group, who are typically the socially elite, which means the socially powerful people, or the wealthy people, and that'll spread to one location while skipping others. This sounds complicated, but it's really not. I want you to consider the diffusion of pop culture. I want you to consider if 2 Chainz is coming out with a new album, then that album, he's not going to take that album and go to the rural countryside, or he's not going to take that album and release it first in the way outskirts of Mumbai in India, right? Instead, that album, consider that album here. Let's say it's released in LA. Then the album's probably going to go to New York and Chicago and probably London, and then move on to other major world cities first, to Tokyo, right? And then perhaps once it's released, let's go back to London, then maybe London will release it first to Birmingham and to some of the other, and then the smaller suburbs from there. Hierarchical diffusion is when ideas go from places of power and money first and then diffuse down from there, right? Consider where iPhones are released. iPhones are going to be released in major world cities first, and then they spread down to different areas, right? That's called hierarchical diffusion, right? Another visual representation here. And it's going to it's going to go from socially powerful, socially elite places down on and trickle on down to other people, and from there. You can see this is the places that experience hierarchical diffusion first are usually the most technologically advanced places. So if you see, this is a map of internet hosts per 1,000 population. You can see where people have greater access to the internet is, of course, then going to be some of the first spots for diffusion. So consider that album release, maybe going here, then here, then here, then here, then maybe up to Canada, maybe over here into all these different populations of Western Europe, and then maybe it'll trickle down here to South America and back over here to Asia. So the hierarchical diffusion, places of power first and then down. Another type of expansion diffusion, this one's pretty logical, would be contagious diffusion. So rapid spread of an idea in all directions, right? The obvious example of that would, of course, be diseases, right? Diseases tend to spread in a contagious fashion, where they're spreading to all of the people within proximity of that idea or place, and without regard to power or wealth, like hierarchical diffusion. Now I want to show you an example here of expansion diffusion. This is pretty cool. It's interactive diseases by lab, so you can actually simulate this. So let's say let's look at the influenza. I don't know what's up with that typo. Let's say we have a high population density. Our population has a medium mixing, and let's say that no people are vaccinated. Let's see what happens, right? Look at that contagious diffusion, right? We have a very, very dead population very quickly, right? We've got, let's see, let's do measles here, right? And we said our population density is medium, and let's say that 10% of the population is vaccinated. So again, we just see the rapid expansion of that disease, right? Although that's nice, it looks like a lot of people were immune on that one. Anyway, so we've got the contagious diffusion. is the rapid idea spread of an idea. Another way to think about contagious diffusion is actually the spread of a rumor, right? You can imagine what happens when a scuffle happens on the basketball court. Then you can imagine just the rumors that spread almost instantaneously. Or viral video, that'd be contagious diffusion. The last type of expansion diffusion is called stimulus diffusion. And stimulus diffusion is when part of an idea or a culture spreads. So take a look at the graphic first. You can see that the graphic has changed, has shifted just slightly. Here's the original idea. And then the orientation of that idea has somehow changed. A great example of stimulus diffusion is if you look at McDonald's globally. If you look at McDonald's globally, what you'll see some commonalities. You've got your trademark M, you've got the yellow sign, some playgrounds even. But what you'll also learn about McDonald's is that the menu changes based upon the preferences of the people. So the concept of McDonald's is spreading. The concept of fast, easy food, typically not healthy food, has spread globally. But it's an example of stimulus diffusion because the idea has not in and of itself in the entirety been maintained. It's not the exact same McDonald's that's down on New York Avenue. That's not the exact same menu that you would find here in Iran or find here. I believe I took this one from South Korea on the top left, right? There's going to be a slightly different menu, which would exemplify stimulus diffusion. Last section here. Geographers like to focus on what encourages things to diffuse and what discourages ideas and people and goods to diffuse. So let's put on the left-hand side forces that work to encourage diffusion, and then right below that on the left-hand side, let's take this term time-space compression. Something that helps encourage ideas to spread over space is the fact that the time it has taken for an idea to spread over space has been compressed. What I mean, let's look first at this example and then I'll go back to the definition. This is kind of a cool graphic. It's a little hard to see, so let me see if I can zoom in just a bit, or I'll just expand it for a minute. If you see here that from 1500 to 1840, that in the transportation options available to us were primarily horse and carriage and sailing ships. So and then by the time, you see how big the world is there, right? The idea it takes by the time we're in the 1850s to 1930s, we have steam locomotives and steam ships. The time it takes for an idea to go from here to here is being compressed. By 1950, we have the propeller plane. The world, and this is a figurative example here, the world is quote unquote getting smaller because the time it takes for an idea to get from here to here is being compressed or reduced. And by 1960, we have jet planes making the world, not literally, figuratively, smaller, that it's going to take much, much, much less time in 2015. And that was 1960, so now let's fast forward 50 years here. We've got the time it takes for something to diffuse over space is being compressed by technology. That means that I, sitting here in Washington, D.C., I'm about to post this video on YouTube specifically for you guys. But let's say I had a colleague, I know people who live in Japan, right? If I want to then give this video to them, the time it will take for this video to diffuse over space is being so compressed. Almost instantaneously, they're going to be able to view this. Another example to understand how time-space compression works. This is a really cool map. This map shows us the blue lines are the shipping lines of the world. So there's typical trading routes around the world. Obviously, you're going to try to find the shortest distance or following the air flow and so on and so forth. The areas in the lightest areas shown on the map, on the land, it takes very little time to travel to those places. In other words, the average travel time it would take versus the dark areas representative of very difficult to get to places, or places where it takes significantly longer to travel there. So we see that the places with technology are the ones who participate in this time-space compression. Those with technology are better able to experience time-space compression. If you don't have modern technology, then ideas will still take you a very long time to move. Ideas will still take a long time to get to you. In other words, diffusion won't happen quickly. But if you are part of this technologically connected world, then that encourages diffusion. It encourages the spread of ideas. Now, two major things that work against diffusion, two things that prevent ideas and prevent movement. One is time-distance decay. Okay? This is also called just distance decay, period, right? The longer and farther something has to go, the less likely it will be to get there. The key example of this is migration. We're going to learn in the next unit that people, if they're migrating internationally, they're going to go, really just migrating, period. They're going to tend to go to closer places first and maintain or stay in those closest places. They're less likely to engage in long distance migration. So if this is true, that the longer and farther something has to go, the less likely it is to get there, then that works against diffusion, right? This isn't too terribly difficult of a concept to understand. If you, here we are in Washington, D.C., it costs us significantly more money, and it's more expensive, remembering, of course, the world is round, to go over here to, say, Western China, than it would to go down here to the Yucatan Peninsula, Cancun, right? So these are going to be the areas. You can see that the patterns of people and the preferences of people influence time distance decay. So the longer something is, the farther something away is, the less likely they're going to experience that. Another example of distance decay, you could consider if a migrant is leaving their place of origin, let's say here, and the farther and farther they get from the node, let's say they relocate here in DC, then they're less likely that person is to be influenced by their original faith, traditions, and original culture. So distance decay, the farther you get from somewhere, the less influence that original node has on you. That doesn't encourage diffusion of ideas. That encourages the adaptation of whatever existing ideas are there. Lastly, we have something that works against diffusion are cultural barriers, right? That if there's a practice, an idea, a thing that goes against the culture of a given place, then it's probably not going to be adapted there. There's not going to be mobility of people, goods, and ideas if it's not culturally acceptable to have that good or idea in a given place. An example of that is alcohol consumption. You can see here in the area that we started this discussion with, talking about the Muslim world, many Muslims don't drink, and so consequently it's considered taboo. Taboo is something that's unacceptable by a culture. The mobility of alcohol in North Africa and in the Middle East is going to be significantly lower. That's preventing the diffusion of alcohol, is a prevailing cultural barrier. So those are some of the forces that work for diffusion, against diffusion, and those are the ways in which geographers study the spread of ideas, people, and goods over space. Here are your 4 analysis questions, pretty straightforward. Number 2 and 3, I'm looking forward to your own examples of hierarchical and stimulus diffusion. Please ensure, as I mentioned already, that the analysis questions read exactly as you see. Flipped video 1.5, what does it mean to think like a geographer, movement, and then your answers here. All right, see you soon.